Alright, picking up where I left off, this is now on to the brush tool. And the brush tool is basically creating a line for you. It'll even things out nicely for you as well, which is kind of nice. But you can try to make it be a little bit more geometric if you felt like it. It'll keep some of it. So important thing in here is that this is a line, not a shape. So you can change the stroke, but you cannot fill this. It's not a proper shape. Alright, now the other thing we need to keep in mind is that you can have different kinds of brushes. So there are a couple variations underneath here. There's nothing too fancy under here, but these are like some basic defaults. And you're welcome to try them. Like if I click on these, you kind of see the difference that's happening behind me here. Now you can find new brushes by going to the open brush library, and there are all sorts of brushes, things you might not have thought of as a brush here. So you can bring these up temporarily. You can bring a bunch of different ones up and just kind of keep them open and test them out. I'll open up another one. And you can just have a few open here at the same time. So anyway, once you choose a brush type, you just shift it. You can do all sorts of different things with these. It's pretty amazing sometimes what they'll do. So yeah, choose wisely. You are not stuck completely with how these function though. Keeping in mind that this is an editable item if you can expand it like most things. So it starts off as a line. If you hit expand, it now becomes a shape, and then you could expand it further just to be sure. Sometimes it takes a double knock on it, and then you can ungroup the pieces, or you can use your direct selection tool, and you can actually then edit the different colors that these could be. So you're not ever stuck with what these are as their defaults. You can manipulate those pretty heavily. Now the other thing you could do here, it's kind of interesting, is any kind of shape that you are making as a line with the brush tool, you can always also expand that. And again, then you shift it from a line to a shape, and then you can do kind of sort of a lot more things with that if you want to. So remember that once it's a shape, you can stroke that, whereas if it's a line, you can't do a double stroke on it. So now you can even put a stroke on that, even if it started off as a line. So I hope all that kind of stuff makes sense. Moving in a little further, you've got that Blob brush tool. The Blob brush tool is it makes shapes automatically, but it's a little bit less. Double click this on here so you can change the size a little bit. It's not as far-reaching in its abilities to change itself because it's creating a shape. It's not creating a line. So while it will attempt to do something for you, it's not the same thing as using the brush tool. So why it might seem confusing as to why there is a Blob brush tool and a brush tool, they do have different functions. They can end up the same, they can all end up as shapes, but the line will allow more flexibility when it comes time to choosing different sorts of brushes. So yeah, that's it for the brushes. Nothing too complicated, but certainly very, very helpful and necessary. And a lot of times this is easier than using the pen tool, I think, as you can imagine. Moving on to the pencil tool, it is, in so many ways it's almost exactly like the brush tool. So you can still increase its thickness, you can still change what kind of, brush that it is, and so in many ways, there's not a huge difference between the brush and the pencil. Now, there is something different though in the smooth tool, which is right underneath it. So if I zoom in here, sometimes you can get it to shift a curve. It'll particularly probably work better on a shape. Let's see if I can get it to do that. So I'm going to select the shape and then see if I can't. It'll kind of smooth things out. In this case, it's moving it a little bit. So it's not. I mean, this is a pretty smooth thing, so it's hard. It's not smoothing it a ton. But that's one thing that it can do. Also on the path eraser tool, I don't particularly like what it does here. It actually causes a break in the shape, so I never use this one. So what happens here, it's hard to see, and you can't really just notice it unless you're looking at it with the zoom on, but you can see here there's the blue line and here's the blue line, but where I clicked it, it erased. So for an extreme example, if I put a stroke on it, then you can really see that it really did damage the shape. So I don't personally know why you would need that shape, but one thing that you can do is you can use the join tool and you can click on one thing and click on another, and it'll join back together what has been broken. And there's another method to do that, though. If I separate those again, I can actually go to the pen tool and just click here and click here, and I think that's actually probably easier. But hopefully that makes sense in terms of how it can function. So there, you know, no matter what I do, it's still connecting the points. So I don't, again, I learned using this method, so I probably will never use this. This is a new tool that they've added. And moving on, we've got the eraser tool, which I find very fun. And use it quite often. And I use it, you know, not just to like slightly edit something, which you can see here, but I'll even just cut right through shapes. And it is, yeah, it's definitely very, very helpful. If it's not the right size, you double click on the icon and you can change the size. For example, if this was too big, and now I can go back in and it's getting a little bit smaller. So that's that one. The one underneath it is a scissors tool. For this one, you have to choose 2 pieces, so, or 2 points, excuse me. So you would click on this one and then like this one, and now you can see that it broke the shape. This is, I don't particularly like this system because, well, you can see what it did. It broke it. It's not a correct shape anymore. The other way to do it is to use the knife tool, which is a little bit more clunky in some ways. But for that one, you start on the outside edge of the shape and just slice through it. Now the good thing about it is that it does make a complete shape, so you can see, whoops, that they are separated. Now another way you can do that, though, just to remind you, if you have a shape, you can use the shape builder tool, and this is actually another purpose for a line tool. So if I draw a line and I need to be able to be actually passing through this blue line, like these blue lines have to intersect. So this is the edge. It's not enough to just be like to barely to put the black just barely on it, and it might look like it's touching, but until it actually crosses over just a little bit, it's not actually going to do it. But anyway, if you select then your shape and your line, you can use the shape builder tool to actually cut them into separate shapes. It might not look like it right away. I can simply delete the line now. You can see that there's just a tiny little bit of line extra, and now like this is a separate shape. So that's just some ways to cut. Delete a couple things here. Underneath this is the rotate tool. There's quite a few different ways to rotate things in this program. You can simply select an item, and if you hover in the corner, you can simply rotate. If you hold the shift key down, it'll rotate it in more kind of like shift you in bigger chunks. You can see like normal angles, horizontal, vertical. You can also double click on this and tell it specifically how many degrees you would like it to move. You can hit the preview key to just be able to see, make sure it's okay. So those are all fine and dandy. You can also go up here to transform and tell it, and you might, if you have a really large screen, these might just be sitting right up here. Because my screen's smaller, it's a drop down. But here you can type in the angle, and you kind of, yeah, so you got 3 ways to do that. Underneath there's the reflect tool. It's kind of a nice handy one to have. Usually for that one I might have done a copy of something, and then I can just tell it to reflect, so I double click on it, tell it which way to reflect, over the vertical, over the horizontal, or change it at an angle, and then I've got something like this happening. You can also, though, do this in another spot. I'll take it back a couple steps. You can also come up to Object, Transform, Reflect, and it's the same exact situation there. I believe it's not there yet. Moving on from there, we've got the Scale tool, the Shear tool, and the Reshape tool. The Scale tool does what it sounds like. It's going to give you scale change, but you can also get that by simply clicking on it, going to the outer edge of your box and scaling it up or down. You could also, under Transform, you can punch in a specific height and width. If you hit the constrain button, if you do something on one of them, it'll do it on the other dimension. But again, under this one, I could have also gone to, sorry, I didn't do that. I could have also gone to Object, Transform, and done a scale change there also. Let's see what else is under there. Oh, and then you can also double click on the tool itself, and then you get these things happening. You can either do non-uniform or uniform, and so on and so forth. You get the gist there. Underneath that one is the Shear tool, and that one just move this over here so we can see a better view. And again, you can get this up here as well. Let's start up here. So essentially, it's skewing it quite dramatically. And of course, you can also get it if you double click there. Same thing, dialog box pops up. And lastly, the Reshape tool, which I don't use. And then for the Reshape tool, it doesn't work with shapes as far as I've been able to figure out, but it does work with lines. So if I draw a line here, and I use this tool, it will actually add anchor points. So if you click somewhere along the line, you can pull and grab. It's essentially like adding another point plus then using the Convert Anchor Point tool altogether. So I can see how that it could be handy for line work. Too bad it doesn't seem to want to work with shapes. And when I've tried, it's just not, it doesn't really let me do anything with it. So it's adding a point. I can see that point that it's added, but as far as being able to curve it or anything like that, it's definitely not allowing me to do that. So, oh well, at least it will add a point. It's just not going to convert the same way that it'll convert on a line. And I think I'll end trying to decide what else I should do. I'll keep going through these ones. These tools, I'm not going to go through them point by point because some of them are just kind of silly. But these are all different ways in which you can manipulate things in sometimes really unexpected ways. You gotta practice these quite a bit before they're actually helpful, in my opinion. But for these ones, whew, that's a big one. Double click on that and make it a little bit smaller. So, you know, that you can change these sizes. So if I pull this one, for example, it's going to curve it out. That one's a pretty small thing that it'll do. The twirl tool, on the other hand, is like crazy. Like, huh? Okay. So you can see that I'm not going to go through all of them. They've all got different particulars, and sometimes they'll be helpful. Sometimes, to be honest, for the most part, they're kind of more funny. But if you're just trying to play, this might be an appropriate set of things for you to use. These ones over here, it's the free transform tool. It actually brings this up, and this is handy. I'm gonna make it a little less complicated shape. This one here, if you hit free transform, and if you click in the corner, you can see here that it'll just kind of blow your piece up a little bit. Oops, I chose a couple. That's fine. Then the next one is the perspective distort. So I can click on a corner. Ooh, it's hard to see here. Okay. And it's going to try to distort this image evenly. So the perspective distort, it's either going to allow this corner to be shifted, ooh, that's dramatic, or this corner. It's either one or the other. If you want to be able to manipulate both, you need to choose the free distort, and then each corner will allow you to do some changes. Otherwise, the other one is, it pulls them in tandem, the perspective one. These two work in tandem, and these two do. All right. And if you want the constraints to be listed, then you click that one. I usually don't, because if there's an intention for me to change things, I usually want that broken, not constrained. And I have covered the shape tool before, but all right, I'll finish that one and then I'll move to the perspective one. So the shape builder tool, quite an awesome piece that they've added to Illustrator a while ago, but it is really great. Again, shape builder is the key here. It has to be a shape, right? Both things have to be a shape. You just saw, though, I can separate a shape with a line. That's okay. But overall, if you're wanting to join things, you either use the Pathfinder for simple things like uniting. You can see these things are coming up. So that was a minus front. This is intersect. This is exclude. So this one is going to just leave. It's going to take out a piece of it. So most of these things are pretty handy, but if you've got more complex things, let me add this shape onto it and you can kind of see how complex it can be. If I select all of those now, I can go to the shape tool and I can pull things out, so that itself could be its own piece. This you'll use heavily for the next assignment, probably more than the one we're doing right now for the logo, but it is a lot of fun to use this tool. And I'm going to stop there and I'll get into the next set now.